Helo a chroeso cynnes iawn i'n digwyddiad gwenyn ar Zoom ni heddiw yma I ddathlu merched ysbrydoledig mewn addysg. Hello and warm welcome to our Zoom webinar event today, celebrating inspirational women in education. I can't think of a better way to spend my Friday morning. Mae'r haul yn twynu, the sun is shining, and we're talking about inspirational women, felly edrych ymlaen. Just before we begin, let's make sure that everybody can access the interpretation or the translation facility today, which we will be using. And it's very exciting because you can listen to this event solely through the medium of Welsh or English, the language of your choice. Diolch o flaen llaw, thank you in advance to our translators. Yola will be translating from Welsh to English and Stefan from English to Welsh. Felly cofiwch chi siaradwyr Cymraeg. Dwi'n eich annog chi I roi cynnig ar ddefnyddio'r gwasanaeth mwyn I chi gael clywed y cyfan yn Gymraeg. So you'll see a slide on your screen now that gives you some instructions on how to access that interpretation facility. So you need to go to interpretation first of all, and then press here to mute the original audio and to only hear the interpreter. So obviously you can have that in English or in Welsh. So os nawn ni gael ymarfer, mi fydda i'n siarad Cymraeg drwy gydol y digwyddiad. Nawn ni just cael ymarfer bach I checio bod popeth yn gweithio. Os nad ydy o'n gweithio, cysylltwch efo ni drwy'r blwch chat. Any problems, contact us through the chat facility. Os nad, hefyd, os oes gennych chi unrhyw gwestiynau heddiw, mae hwn yn ddigwyddiad rhangweithiol, da ni eisiau pwysleisio hynna. Felly mae croeso cynnes, da ni'n croesawu eich adborth, eich sylwadau a'ch cwestiynau chi, a gallwch chi gysylltu efo ni trwy'r Q&A, a box cwestiwn ac ateb. Mi na I drio dod at sylwadau pawb, ond yn ddibynnol ar yr amser a faint o sylwadau gawn ni mewn, falle bydd rhaid I ni ymateb i'r rhai ohonyn nhw ar ôl y digwyddiad, ond please cysylltwch. Gwybodaeth mi ydym ni'n recordio y digwyddiad heddiw yma. A dyna ni, reit, y pethau gweinyddol ymarferol allan o'r ffordd. Felly dwi'n gyffroes ofnadwy at y digwyddiad heddiw. Dwi'n edrych ymlaen I glywed yn cyfranwyr ni yn trafod rôl merched ysbrydoledig yn y byd addysg. Maen nhw wedi gadael I marc yma yng Nghymru. A dwi'n meddwl, tra ni'n paratoi at heddiw, ond ni ddim yn gallu peidio meddwl am yr holl fenywod merched ysbrydoledig sydd wedi dylanwadu arna fi, merched dawnus, angerddol, brwdfrydig, sydd wedi dylanwadu arna I ar hyd yn oes, yn athrawon ysgol, yn ddarlithwyr, yn fosys, yn fentoriaid, cydweithwyr, ac arweinwyr cymunedol yn ymplith ni. Felly dwi'n ddiolchgar iawn o'r gefnogaeth a'r anogaeth dwi wedi gael gan y merched hynny ar hyd yn oes ac yn cydnabod heddiw I dylanwad pellgyrhaeddol nhw, a falle bod heddiw yn gyfle I chi hefyd just stopio'n funud a meddwl am y merched yna sydd wedi cael argraff ac eich dylanwadu chi ar hyd eich oes chi. Felly, heb oedi ymhellach, dwi eisiau symud ymlaen at yn siaradwr cynta ni. Rwan, mae Nilw Amed wedi recordio darn I ni o flaen llaw. Mae Nilw yn gweithio I Brifysgol Bryste ac mae hi yn mynd I fod, Dr Nilwffwr Amed ydy henw llawn hi. Mae hi'n seicolegydd, mae hi'n academydd ac mae hi'n hyfforddwr amrywiaeth a chynhwysiant. Mae gwaith hi yn canolbwyntio ar rymuso cymunedau lleiafrifol ac ymylol. Mae hi'n cael ei hysgogi gan ei hangerdd hi dros gydraddoldeb a chynhwysiant. Mae'n gweithio'n agos iawn efo sefydliadau o bob maint i'w helpu nhw I gyflawni newidiadau diwylliannol yn ymwneud â chynhwysiant. Mae'n angerddol am ddefnyddio addysg fel arf ar gyfer grymuso ac mae hi yn gweithio'n agos iawn gyda grwpiau o ferched I gefnogi hyn. Felly, da ni'n mynd I droi at recordiad a wneithwyd gan Nilw yn trafod gwerth addysg mewn lles.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Nilüfer Ahmed and I am a psychologist and a psychotherapist, and I am delighted to have been invited to be able to talk to you today I wish only that I could be there in person. I'm sure that there will be some fabulous discussions happening today, and I'm really looking forward to catching up on them. I hope you all have a really wonderful day. The title of my talk is The Value of Education for Well-Being. And it's quite a broad talk, and I am talking to you without any notes and thinking about it really on my feet, as it were. But there is so much to talk about when it comes to education. Education, you will have heard the adage that educate a woman and you educate a nation. And that's no small saying, and there is so much truth in that. We know the power of educating women. If it wasn't so dangerous, if it wasn't so transformative, then we wouldn't have so many people around the world, so many cultures, so many generations, so many individuals trying to limit access to education for people, but particularly for women. This is why Malala Yousafzai had got shot in the head, because the Taliban in Afghanistan was trying to limit education of women. What we often get is a conflation between whether that's Islamic principles limiting education or whether that's cultural. What we know, of course, is that it's entirely cultural, that Islam as a religion has always advocated for the education of women, particularly for that very reason, that if you educate a woman, she will transform her family, she will have independence, all of the things that we really want to see in society. Education has such great impacts for us, and it really allows people to begin to cultivate their own independent thinking. It allows people to become really sociable and to think about their impact of being together in a community. We begin to see things in relation to other people. We begin to position ourselves in relation to us, our communities, our families, our society, and globally as well. So it's such an important element, and to have access to that is an incredible privilege. To be able to access it when we have resources and time is something that we should all really try and make best use of. We know from the literature around education that it has huge impacts on our well-being. Being able to continue to engage in education throughout the life course is really important for us. It helps our brains to stay healthy. When we begin to learn and to think about material in different ways, we begin to expand those neural pathways in our brain. You might have heard the saying, what fires together, wires together. When you start to put bits of information together, you start to really expand your brain and the way you think. And if we can do that, then we can age more healthily as well. This is why lots of doctors will recommend older patients begin to do crosswords and Sudoku, things like that, to really keep your brain thinking and ticking over. If you can expand this into longer aspects of education, a short course, a training course, 1 day, 1 hour, a couple of hours, it helps all the more. And of course, education comes in all different aspects. Some of the most wonderful bits of education might be things that you've never thought of before. Education is not simply what we do in the classrooms at schools. It is much broader than that. It's about anything that helps us advance our learning. And if you are learning something new, you are being educated. In that way, I'm sure we are all engaged in education every single day, in both being recipients of education, but also educating others through the learning and expertise that we all have. I'll share with you a little anecdote now, if I may. I spent some time as a carer. I took a little bit of a career break, and I was a carer for my father, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But during that time, I was able to complete my PhD. It was part of a choice that I made because I was housebound with my dad. I continued my education and I completed it. It wasn't easy, and I don't recommend doing it in those circumstances. It was quite isolating, but it was the time that I could do it. And the relevance of that is that you will always find something that is right for you. So if there is an aspect of education or a course that you think, I'd like to do this, but it doesn't work for me, then there will be something that does work for you. So please don't give up on education if you have an opportunity for it. During that time when I was being both a full-time carer and completing my PhD, I was unable to be a regular student because of my care duties. But one of the things I managed to engage in was an adult learning, lifelong learning class for sewing. And it was so wonderful. It is no underestimation and it is no exaggeration to say that that class probably saved my life, if not my sanity at least. It was so lovely. I was one of the places that I found greatest happiness in, and it will always be one of the most wonderful resources and my happy place to go to emotionally, even though I'm no longer part of the class because of work things. It was a space where I met lots of other women, lots of women of different ages, and it was so peaceful. In terms of the broader aspects of education, what I can tell you is that we were doing sewing, which is great and very enjoyable, but there were so many occasions when I didn't even get my sewing out of my bag. It just didn't come out. By the time I'd gone round and said hello to everyone, had a little chat, and then we braked for a coffee break, and we had a little chat, then it seemed like there was no point in taking my work out now. I'll just come and do it another day. And this is a really important and often overlooked aspect of education. It's not just the qualification that we get at the end. It's not just the new skills that we acquire, because we acquire multiple broader skills and resources throughout. During that time, I received so much love and support. It was in the unspoken acts of tenderness and togetherness in the spaces we shared. I received so much support to build my own resilience and my ability to cope with more stressful things in my life. When sadly my dad did pass away, that group of women was such a valuable support resource for me. The kindness that I had at that time is something that I will remember for the entirety of my life. And so it's not just about what I can gain from this in terms of what do I finish, what certificate will I get. You gain so much more through education. We also know it's really important to combat things like isolation and mental health decline. If you're talking to people, you build relationships, you build your own confidence, and particularly coming out of lockdown when many of us have just not had the same level of interaction and social interaction as we previously have had. So we've experienced different levels of social anxiety to re-engage and reintegrate into the community. Spaces of education allow us to do that in a softer way, in a much more safe and inclusive way. And so make use of those spaces for those reasons as well. We also know that people who engage in education, it completely transforms your way of thinking. There is lots of research that shows that education is more highly correlated with physical well-being, with social well-being, with your sense of purpose and being really integrated into your own social community. So it brings all of these benefits. It's not necessarily one particular course of education. It's that whole process of learning new things, of being part of an educational journey and being educated. What it also does is that it can help you to really shift careers, to find a new career, to find something that you might like to do. You might take this educational journey and then decide to become a volunteer, a befriender. You might even start a new career. I said right at the start that I'm a psychologist and a psychotherapist. I became a psychotherapist fairly recently. It was built on from years of being a psychologist, working in mental health, being an academic, and I still am an academic, of course. But it's another thing that I've learned and I've added to my repertoire of skills, to my work and my career. And this is through just continuously being involved in adult education. It's something I'm deeply passionate about, and I love to learn. And you will find your own passion for the things that you love to learn, and you might even surprise yourself and find a new lease of life and potentially a new career for yourselves as well. And from that, I think I'm around 10 minutes of my time with you, and I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to engage with you, and I will really hope to try and chat to you all soon. Thank you all very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Diolch, Nilw. Fideo anhygoel oedd yn eich tynnu chi mewn, ynde, ac mor braf clywed I stori a'i phrofiad personol hi yna, o brofiad o fod yn dysgu Cymraeg I oedolion am flynyddoedd. Mi oedd y gefnogaeth yna a'r gyfeillgarwch yna, dyna mae rhywun yn gael mewn dosbarth yn werthfawr ofnadwy, a ddim yn rhywbeth ydych chi'n disgwyl pan ydych chi yn cofrestru ar gwrs. Ond yn sicr yn un o'r pethau pwysica sy'n dod o'r profiad. Iawn te, felly mae Rachel Clark wedi ymuno â ni rwan, dwi'n falch iawn o ddeud. Dwi'n ymwybodol iawn bod hi'n mynd I siarad mewn cynhadledd arall am hanner awr wedi, felly nawn ni symud ymlaen yn eitha sydyn at Rachel. Felly fel ddedais I yn ei chyflwyniad hi, mae Rachel yn wyres I Betty Campbell. Felly, da ni'n mynd I gael mewnwelediad personol I hanes a dylanwad Betty Campbell. Felly, over to you, Rachel, and thank you for joining us.
Morning. It's lovely to see everybody this morning. I'm sorry I'm not speaking Welsh. I know you can hear I have an English accent, but the Welsh blood flows through my veins, and my grandmother Betty Campbell was incredibly proud of her Welsh history. Whenever we'd go on holiday, she would often talk about, talk to people randomly in the swimming pool about how proud she was to be Welsh. So I don't want my voice to distract you over my heritage and my understanding over that. It's lovely to be here this morning. I know I only have 10 minutes, but I just wanted to share with you the important role education played in my grandmother's life, in my life, and her legacy, really. As part of the important conference you're having today. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. So Betty Campbell, my grandmother, was somebody who really strove for change in education. Her genuine belief was that education was the one tool that could open worlds to young people that had been previously closed. She was somebody who went to a grammar school herself, and I know lots of you might have watched the documentary that was shown on the BBC about her being told at school that being a teacher and her dream of being a teacher would be insurmountable because of all the challenges she'd have to face, and that really, really upset her. However, her courage to really push through was something that was second to none. And as we all know, she went on to become a teacher, but also to become a head teacher as well. She was somebody who nurtured the growth in all young people she taught. She was somebody who saw the best in everybody, who believed in second chances. Her values as a leader, as a school leader, of integrity, of honesty, of vision, being a visionary and having a really clear vision and purpose, but also one of nurture, was really, really important. Often we hear about the hard side, if you like, of my grandmother and her determination to break through barriers and challenges and glass ceilings and concrete ceilings and all the ceilings you can think of. But what we don't hear a lot about is the nurturing side of her. And as educators, that's really, really important for us to remember. It's not good enough if we just stick hard and fast to rules all the time. And if we keep being really hard and, we've got to try to break through. That might be part of our story, but it can't be the only approach we take when we're talking about developing young minds to grow, to blossom and to thrive into great ones. And that's something she really did. I myself, I'm a deputy head teacher of a London primary school. I have no desire to be a head teacher at all. Lots of people very surprised because my mother was also a head teacher. My godmother was, my grandmother was, but that's not for me. I go around and I speak about anti-racism a lot because that is for me going to make a huge difference alongside education. If we can take on anti-racist messages and anti-racist practice. And I know in Wales there's so much going on at the moment, and I'm part of that work, which I'm incredibly proud of as well. And it's something that my grandmother did ahead of her time. She included as well as nurtured. She made young people believe in themselves because she reflected themselves in her curriculum in her school. And I know that Black history is mandatory on Welsh curriculums from this year, from this September. And I know that we're on a journey with that in Wales, but she was ahead of her time. She was somebody who made sure that all children and young people had a really strong sense of value, a strong sense of purpose, and a strong sense of themselves. And that's something that she gave to me as her granddaughter, as well as other family members too. And so as educators, I'd like us to think about what we're doing in our schools and our education spaces to make sure that we do this for the people that we work in and work with. What do we do to help them feel valued? How do we teach them values like courage and determination and willing, that when the going gets tough, we still stick around and we work our way through? How do we show them the caring side? She would always, like, children and young people always knew that she wasn't a very easy lady. She had very high expectations. She had a really strong sense of moral justice, but she took the time to know people. And as women leaders, as we all are here today, what we have to bear in mind is we have to take time to know people that we work alongside, because we know that in education, if we're going to make a difference, we need to make a difference with the adults we work alongside and work with. We've got to get them on board with our messages. We've got to get them on board with our ideas in order for them to give their best to the young people they have to then educate. And that's something she really did so well. And it's what I've taken from, or one of the things that I've taken from her leadership, her female leadership, that nurturing side as well as the tough side. But underpinning all of that was her real strong sense of justice and her strong integrity that she saw threaded through everything. And I think for me, her legacy is about how she made people feel, and how empowered she made people feel. It didn't matter what their role was. She did not feel that she was any better than anybody else, but what she had a really strong sense of is not being worse than people. And that's something I think we as leaders have to instill in all those we work alongside and also all those that we educate, because having a strong sense of self is the foundation to self-belief, which then means that we're going to have high expectations of ourselves as an end goal and as an end game, which means that when things do get tough, we can break through because we'll have that resilience. And so what I would like us to sort of bear in mind moving forward, and I'm sure you've explored this already today, is please remember that education is really, really important, as she believed it was, and it still is today. But we've got to remember as leaders that we've got a duty of care to all people that we work alongside, and people will remember how we make them feel. And not long after she died, lots of people, whether in Morrison's or just in the local community, because I spent a bit of time down there quite close to the time when she passed away. Oh, I remember Betty, and I can't believe she's not here. And every time she went on a holiday, she'd always remember me. She'd always bring something back for me, and it'd be something back related to something that I'm interested in. Now, I'm not saying that as leaders we need to go and buy gifts. That's not what it is, because that wouldn't necessarily be an authentic relationship. But building authentic relationships is something that we all have to do as leaders. And I implore us all as leaders to have that as a prerequisite to getting people to do things that might be difficult to come on board with. They're going to be a lot easier if they believe in us as leaders. And our leadership begins with authentic relationship, which has its roots in integrity. So I really hope, I know I've been brief, and I might have a few minutes to go perhaps, but I really, really do hope that the messages from my grandmother of giving equal value to everybody, of building a strong sense of self, on making sure that everybody's histories, her stories, are represented in education are really, really important ones, and not forgetting the adults, remembering those too. Thank you so much. Nia, I'm not sure if you want to ask me a couple of quick questions before I have to fly, because I know I won't be able to make your panel later on, which I'm really gutted about because I'm doing something else, but I'm happy to answer any quick questions if you have them.
Fabulous. Diolch yn fawr, Rachel. I just have this overwhelming sense of wanting to whoop and cheer, because all the way through, I'm sure we were all going, yeah, I agree. So many important and inspiring messages there about nurturing, about caring, and about looking after, and being interested in the people that we grow alongside, isn't it? So I know I see Catherine's come on screen yn fan'na, so dwi'n meddwl bod Catherine eisiau gofyn cwestiwn I ti. Thank you, Rachel. Fire away, Catherine.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much. I'm Catherine. I'm the Chief Executive of Addysg Oedolion Cymru Adult Learning Wales. It's so lovely to have you here today and to hear so much of your grandmother and all those key messages. Part of our desire for today is to take those key messages away as an organisation and to ask our speakers to leave us with a top tip, essentially, of how we can actually promote more opportunities for women in education. As an organisation, we're working with women from all backgrounds, all walks of life, diverse areas, including race equality and the Welsh language and lots of different aspects. You've obviously left us with lots of really good messages today, but this message around how we make people feel, I would hope that everybody who's listening today and has an association with the organisation would appreciate that really does run through the veins of the organisation. So is there anything else you want to add that I can take away as Chief Executive today in terms of enabling more women to enjoy a good level of education and to progress and achieve? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's considering who is round that decision-making table. So as Chief Executive, who is round that table? And if people round that table are not from a diverse set of backgrounds, not just along the lines of race, I might add, then how do you hear those voices? Because I think when we're talking about getting more women into and how we include, often we're speaking from white majority spaces, white heterosexual majority spaces, white heterosexual Christian majority spaces, you know? And so getting more people in, that more has to be inclusive. And I know you've already explained that, but if those decisions around that table, the day-to-day runnings of the world, are not made up of a collective of voices, then the same unequal structures will be upheld. And so what I'd like you to take away is to think and consider a little bit more deeply about how you hear those marginalised voices before those decisions are being made on the behalf of everybody.
Thank you, Rachel. I will definitely do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Rachel. Enjoy the rest of your day and happy Easter. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Wel iawn te, ac yn disgwyl amdano ni rwan, mae'n siaradwr nesa ni. Dwi'n mor falch o fedru croesawu athro Diana Lorilad. Mae hi'n athro mewn dysgu gyda thechnoleg digidol yn UCL Knowledge Lab Coleg Prifysgol Llundain, wrth gwrs. Mae gan ei nifer fawr o deitlau clodwiw. Mi fuodd yn bennaeth yr uned strategaeth e-ddysgu yn Adran Addysg a Sgiliau'r Llywodraeth ac yn ddirprwy is-ganghello'r dysgu, technoleg ac addysgu yn y Brifysgol Agored. Gwasanaethodd ar Fwrdd Llywodraethwr Sefydliad Technoleg Gwybodaeth mewn addysg i UNESCO. Mae hi'n awdur ac ym mis Ionawr eleni, mae hon yn ffaith anhygoel. Mis Ionawr eleni, fe gafodd ei rhestru fel un o'r 200 o wyddonwyr gorau'r byd gan Brifysgol Stanford. Am hynny felly, mae'n fraint enfawr eich bod chi yn ymuno â ni heddiw yma, felly diolch o galon i chi, Diana, i drafod pwysigrwydd technoleg ddigidol mewn byd ar ôl y pandemig. Dyma'r athro Diana Lorlad. Diolch. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Nia. Well, I have to say the privilege is mine. First of all, thank you very much for listening to me in English. And if you're not listening to me in English, then I thank the translators. I'm very aware of how fortunate we are to be able to speak English pretty much everywhere in the world. It's amazing. And then thank you again for the invitation, because it's a real honor to be part of this. I thought it was such a fantastic idea to have this kind of a conference on the panel. So I'm very much looking forward to all the rest of it. So let me see if I can just get my slides up. So my title is The Importance of Digital Technology in a Post-Pandemic World, and certainly has been a very interesting 2 years. The terrible universal tragedy of the pandemic has enabled us to see something different in the way in which we're using learning technologies. And my story is really to try and talk through how we can make use of this now to look forward to the future of education. And the storyline goes from the classroom to the world, but noting that what we need now, most of all, is teacher agency in discovering what we can now do with digital learning innovations, and linking that local level at which all teachers work at to the global level of teachers now being able to collaborate and share ideas to build that innovation, which they then take back to their classroom. So my question is really, how can we achieve this impact on the future of education through teachers collaborating to build this kind of essentially new knowledge about digital pedagogies? Well, I'm going to tell you a brief life story, because the story began for me when I was in my 20s, and I was teaching maths in the Polytechnic to engineering students who were struggling quite a lot with the maths. And then I discovered the Open University's television programs on mathematics, and they had the most wonderful simulations of mathematical ideas. So I used to pirate them and download them and use them in my lectures. And that was really my first introduction to what digital technologies could do for understanding and learning. Then I had the good fortune to become part of a research program which was making digital simulations for essentially science topics. And we were working across 3 universities to introduce that, but that was during the 70s. And then I had the good fortune to be able to work at the Open University, because this, of course, was Britain's largest university, and it had an interest in digital media because all of its students were very distant. So when the internet came along, this was a tremendous opportunity to be able to reach students in a different way. Then I spent 3 years on secondment to the Department for Education and Skills to develop their e-learning strategy, which was cross-sector, right from primary to higher education. I spent 3 years doing that, which was a tremendous education, being able to listen to stories from all around the country of how people were tackling this. And then went back to academia, because what I really wanted to try and do was to reach the teachers. And that was really one of the interesting changes in focus for me over that period of time. Was to begin with, it was all about how students react to the technology. And then in the middle period, I was really trying to say, well, it's actually leaders who've got to sort this out, create the strategies and lead people forward. And then after a few years of working on that and realizing that really government was not there, even national government was not the answer. And the answer really lay in the teachers themselves. You've got to work through the teachers. They're the ones who are with the students every day. And if you're trying to change education, you've got to do it through teachers. So there was progress during this time in numbers, of course, from 30 students in my class to going global with large-scale platforms. But that progress was all due to the technology. And it was very clear that any progress in the quality of education that we were creating needed to engage with the teachers. And of course, over that period as well, I was very aware of influences from all sorts of women I was coming up against. And from Jenny Lee, I think was the first inspirational woman in education for me, setting up the Open University. And then now I would say the refugee teachers that I'm working with in Lebanon, where we're trying to see how digital methods can minimize and even progress some of the educational effects of the terrible disasters in that country. So the pandemic is playing an important role, because in this story, we have to now ask who learned the lessons of digital education during the pandemic. Well, it has to be said it was the teachers. They are now bringing knowledge alive through these different kinds of digital methods. So we have to find ways of listening to them. But how do we do that? How do we listen to teachers? Well, this is something we started thinking about some years ago and created the Learning Designer, which is this tool, which is an open online tool. It's available to everybody. And the idea of it is to provide a structure to enable the teacher to express and articulate their pedagogy in some detail. So it looks a bit like this. It's a little like developing a lesson plan, but in much more forensic detail than a lesson plan would normally ask for. So if we really want teachers to work together to understand the detail of the pedagogy, then it's important to be able to get down to a good description of it. And I'll try and give you a sense of that in a minute. So with this tool, you can either adapt an existing design, or you can analyze the design that you've created, then embed it in Moodle or some kind of platform, and even export it to a Word document if you want to exchange it with other teachers or maybe with your students. But the point of it is to look at teaching and learning from the student's point of view. So this is all about what is the student doing? And if we're thinking about how we share our pedagogic innovations, then we're going to have to help both teachers and students who've been grappling with these difficult issues about the pandemic over the last year or two, to figure out how we work and act in this way in this new digital world. We've got this plethora of possibilities with new technologies now available to us. How do we manage all this innovation? That can't come down to an individual teacher. We've got to be able to share our ideas. And in particular, how do we collaborate to improve quality? That's not something that teachers have particularly been invited to do, to collaborate on developing new methods of education. Professional development courses are more usually done to us than they are done with us. But we can only really build new knowledge together by sharing and exchanging ideas about how best to work with these new technologies. And for that, we use the Learning Designer. And I've tried to give you a sense of this, because what I've done here is to take an existing learning design, which is about creating a peer review process for students who can peer review whatever the assignment is. It might be an essay or a design or whatever. Peer review each other's work and then improve it through commenting on each other's work. And doing a peer review is as important as getting one, I can promise you. And then the teacher ends up getting a much better kind of essay or assignment than they would otherwise have got. And what it does is to ask you to select for each of the learning tasks you're giving students what kind of learning this is. So a drop-down menu allows you to choose one of 6. In this case, I got the practice and then a produce learning task. And for each one, I assign the duration of how long they're meant to do it. Now, remember, they're doing this all outside the class. The teacher is not there to run it for them. And the advantage of this is that the pie chart now knows how much time you've assigned to each different type of learning, so that over the whole design, maybe several hours, it may be a few minutes, it varies. I know that I've used a proportion of it for learning through acquisition, quite a lot of it for learning through practice, and quite a lot of it learning through production. But it's a way of making the teacher think about their teaching from the learner's point of view. So how do we now collaborate to take forward these innovations, which all of these teachers are doing individually, and bring that together? Well, that's where large-scale teacher professional development comes in, such as this, which is a course on the FutureLearn platform. We call it a massive open online collaboration rather than a course. It's on blended and online learning design. There's a link to enroll, and the current run is going on until the 15th of May. It'd be wonderful if you'd like to join us. But the point of it is to include videos from teachers in all sectors showing how they're using digital methods. And the exercises are all based around using the learning designer tool so that teachers can explore and exchange their digital ideas of all the good ways they've come up with for supporting their learners. So it's a great way of listening to the teachers, of finding out what teachers are doing. And this is an example of what it's doing in the second week of the course, where we've given teachers a learning design. And this one is from a teacher in physics who's designed a very nice way of getting students to understand a particular concept and explain it. The concept happens to be the water cycle in physics. And we've said, now, can you adapt that digital pedagogy to your own topic? Now, this is what they've done, and they put a link into their pattern in the learning design. And look at this range of topics that they've adapted that same pedagogy to: a digital mixing desk, planet conservation, child development, conjugating verbs. Is an extraordinary range. Because what teachers can do across all those subject areas, and even across sectors sometimes, is share their pedagogic ideas. So in the process of this, we are able to bring teachers together to decide, how do you work with both online and classroom? How do you blend those two together and share those ideas? And this is, in a sense, the beginning of sharing to collaborate on creating new digital pedagogies. So overall, I think the pandemic has taught us a lot. And we can learn a lot from inspirational teachers, not just from Jenny Lee to those teachers in Lebanon who are teaching refugees. They are sometimes refugees themselves, trying to grapple with these new technologies, figure out what we can do. The most important thing we have to do is to create teacher agency, because it's the teachers who are being innovative, the teachers who need to share and collaborate. And I think one of the things I took from both Nuala and from Rachel was the importance of being able to do nurturing in the context of education. And I think what we're trying to do here is to nurture the teachers. So trust the teachers is my mantra. Maybe this is my tip, Catherine, I'm not sure, but I think we have to trust the teachers to be able to come up with the new ways of working for the future of education, and to collaborate to develop these new digital technologies. So thank you very much again, and I look forward to our further discussion.
Diolch o galon, Diana, am y wybodaeth yna I gyd, eich mewnwelediad chi, am rannu eich profiad chi. A dwi'n hoff iawn o'r syniad yna bod ni jyst yn gweithio'n well hefo'n gilydd, rhannu athrawon yn rhannu arbenigedd, yn rhannu gweledigaeth, yn rhannu syniadaeth. Mae'n hynod o bwysig. So I'm just going to check here to see if we've had any questions come in. Os yna unrhyw un wedi eisiau gofyn cwestiwn. Dwi'n gwybod, Diana, bod chi ar y panel i ni. You'll be on our panel yn nes ymlaen, and therefore gawn ni ofyn cwestiynau I chi bryd hynny. Ond am rwan, diolch o galon I chi. Iawn te, mae gennym ni un cyfraniad arall, a mae hon yn gyfraniad sydd hefyd wedi cael ei recordio o flaen llaw. Mae Luned Meredith, Iona Price ac Angharad Thomas yn dair o'n cefnogwyr ni yma yng Ngwynedd. Mi wnaethon nhw neilltu o'r rhanhelaeth fawr o'i hamser nhw yn ystod y cyfnodau clo Covid I gynnal ymchwil manwl iawn ymhlith archif WEA Gogledd Cymru ym Mangor. Mae'r WEA, neu Cymdeithas Addysg y Gweithwyr, wrth gwrs, yn un o ragflynyddion yn mudiad presennol ni, fel y gwyddoch. Ac un o'r prif diddordebau i'r dair yna oedd darganfod mwy am y cyfraniad enfawr a wnaethpwyd gan Mary Silyn Roberts, pennaeth WEA Gogledd Cymru o 1930 I 1945, ac yn gyfrannydd o bwys I addysg oedolion ar hyd I hoes. Felly mae gennym ni fideo yn fama rwan o Angharad Thomas yn sôn am yr hyn wnaethon nhw ddarganfod. Mae'r darn yn Gymraeg.
Mary a Silyn Roberts. Mae fraint cael deud gair wrthych chi heddiw am Mary a Silyn Roberts, sylfaenwyr y WEA yng Ngogledd Cymru. Maen nhw'n arwyr I mi, gymaint felly fel rydw I wedi treulio'r flwyddyn a hanner ddwytha yn sgwennu nofel amdanynt. Pwy oedden nhw felly? Dwi falch o gael deud mai un o ddyffryn anlla fardal i oedd Silin. Bu'n chwarelwr am 5 mlynedd, wedi gadael yr ysgol yn 40 oed, ac yna cafodd ysgoloriaeth i fynd i brifysgol Bangor. O ganlyniad, roedd yn ŵr gafodd fagwraeth dosbarth gweithio, ac ni anghofiodd hynny. Wedi graddio, aeth yn weinidog i Lundan, i Flaenau Ffestiniog, ac wedi gadael y weinidogaeth, daeth yn drefnydd cyntaf y WEA yng Ngogledd Cymru. Yr hyn nath Silin yn wahanol yn ei ddydd oedd ei fod yn sosialydd. Roedd hefyd yn fardd cenedlaethol a enillodd goron yr Eisteddfod Genedlaethol ym 1912. Ond fedrwch chi ddim trafod Silin heb drafod Mary. Un o Gymru Llundain oedd Mary a aned ym 1877. Roedd hi 6 mlynedd yn iau na Silin aned ym 1871. Saer oedd ei thad ac yn un o sefydlwyr y Capel Cymraeg yn Hammersmith, Llundain, ac roedd ei mam yn cadw tŷ lodgin neu westy yn Earl's Court. Ac os ydy gyrfa Silin yn un ddifyr, mae Mary yn fwy felly, petai ond am ei bod yn ferch wedi cael ei haddysg yn oes Victoria. Roedd hi ymysg y merched cyntaf i astudio ym Mhrifysgol Aberystwyth, a chafodd waith yno yn darlithio wedi hynny, ac mi fu'r ddau yn canlyn am 6 mlynedd. O ganlyniad mae gen ymwaddol gyfoethog o lythyra rhwng y ddau, yn trafod ei syniadau, ei hoff bethau, ei cariad at ei gilydd, ei hawyd i deithio a'i delfrydau, ac mae hon yn ohebiaeth fendigedig. Yn un o'r llythyrau hyn, dywed Silin wrth Mary, "Judging from your letters, you seem to be a very matter of fact young woman." Ac mae hyn yn crisialu Mary. Tra roedd Silin yn rhamantydd ac yn fardd, roedd Mary a'i thraed ar y ddaear. Roedd hi'n wraig hynod ymarferol, ac roedd hi hefyd yn wraig alluog. Mae'r hanesydd R.T. Jenkins oedd yn y coleg yr un pryd â hi, yn ei disgrifio fel brenhines y coleg. Roedd hi'n wraig ifanc hyderus, yn canu nawdau ac yn canu mewn opera, yn actio, yn canu'r delyn, yn areithio, yn dadlau mewn debating societies. Hi gafodd y gwahoddiad ym 1914 gan Fwrdd Addysg Llundain i ymweld ag ysgol haf yn Nenmarc i ddarlithio. Teithiodd yno ei hun a dotio at y wlad. Fe'i llyncwyd gan weledigaeth y Daniaid o addysg am oes, am goleg mwyn addysg yn hytrach na choleg mwyn ennill gradd, ac fe'i swynwyd gan y syniad o brifysgol y Werin. O hynny ymlaen, cael coleg felly yng Nghymru oedd un o freuddwydion Mary. Bu yn ymweld â Denmarc yn gyson wedyn trwy ei bywyd. Pobl ryngwladol eu hagwedd oedd yr rhain. Teithiodd Silin i Baris, i'r Swistir, i America ac i Rwsia. Roedd yn Ewropeaid wrth redd. A lle bynnag yr aint, boed yn Hannu Grisia, y Bari neu Fangor, un delfryd oedd ganddynt, rhannu buddiannau addysg. Hwy drefnodd y dosbarth i oedolion cyntaf yng Ngogledd Cymru, ym Mlaenau Ffestiniog ym 1910. Cyn iddynt glywed am y WEA hyd yn oed. A phan gafodd Silin y swydd ym 1922 fel athro dosbarthiadau allanol ym Mangor, roedd Mary wrth ei ochr bob cam o'r ffordd ac yn darlithio ei hun. Yn ogystal â bod yn addysgwraig wrth redd, roedd Mary hefyd yn drefnydd dan gamp ac ni wastraffodd y ddawn hon. Yn y Bari roedd hi a Silin yn byw yn ystod y Rhyfel Mawr, a phenodwyd Mary yn drefnydd y Land Army dros Gymru. Hynny ydy, y merched fyddai'n mynd i drin y tir tra roedd y dynion yn y fyddin. Roedd yn fam i 2 o fechgyn a merch fach oedd yn flwydd, ond dwi'n ebod yr heriau hyn a mynd rhagddi, pan mae prin iawn oedd y merched oedd yn gwneud hynny, sef magu teulu a dilyn gyrfa. Roedd hefyd yn darlithio ac yn cymryd diddordeb byw ym materion yr oes. Erbyn 1925 roedd camau ymarferol yn cael eu cymryd tuag at sicrhau Coleg Addysg Oedolion. Roedd y wern fawr yn Harlech yn mynd ar werth, a llwyddodd Thomas Jones i gael y perchenog i'w werthu am bris rhesymol, a chanfu'r nawdd i'w brynu. Roedd Mary a Silin yn rhan hanfodol o'r trefniadau o'r cychwyn, ac ar ddiwrnod agor Coleg Harlech, Mary Silin oedd un o'r siaradwyr, a'r unig ferch ar y llwyfan gyda llaw. Roedd wedi arfer bod yr unig ferch mewn cymaint o sefyllfaoedd, ond yn amlwg roedd ochr unig i hyn. Fel trefnydd, gwnaeth Silin waith anhygoel yn trefnu canghennau ac roedd Gogledd Cymru yn rhanbarth annibynnol erbyn 1925. Rhwng cychwyn y rhanbarth a 1930, sef 5 mlynedd gyntaf, sefydlodd Silin 40 o ganghennau newydd yn y Gogledd. Erbyn 1930, roedd y WEA ei hun yn gyfrifol am 63 dosbarth. Roedd nifer y myfyrwyr wedi codi o 450 i 2,300, y cyfartaledd uchaf yn ôl y boblogaeth drwy Brydain. Mawr oedd y galw am addysg oedolion, ac oherwydd sosialaeth Silin, ddaru nhw ddim dioddef y gynnen yn y de pan fyddai gweithwyr yn ystyried y Central Labour College yn fwy radical na'r WEA. O'r cychwyn cyntaf, gan gofio ei wreiddiau yn y chwarel, roedd Silin wedi rhoi lle canolog i'r undebau yn rhefniant y WEA, ac o ganlyniad cafodd gefnogaeth yr undebau a'r gweithwyr. Ym 1926, o gofio colledion dychrynllyd yr Rhyfel Mawr, daeth merched o bob cefndir ynghyd yng Nghymru a Phrydain i drefnu ymgyrch hedd nid cledd. Ymgyrch oedd hon i bwyso ar arweinyddion y gwledydd y tro nesaf y byddai angytundeb. Y byddai arweinwyr yn dod at ei gilydd i drafod yn hytrach na chodi arfa. Bu deiseb efo miloedd o enwa arni, gyda merched yn casglu'r enwa, ac yna trefnwyd gorymdaeth o bob rhan o Brydain i gerdded i Lundain i gynnal rali enfawr yn Hyde Park, lle roedd dros 15 o lwyfannau. Yng Ngogledd Cymru, Mary oedd un o'r prif drefnwyr, a hi fynodd mai o ddyffrynanlle roedd y merched yn cychwyn. Rydym wedi rhoi plac ym Mhen y Groes i gofio y 2,000 o wragedd ddaeth ynghyd i gychwyn y daith, ac yn Hyde Park ar ddiwrnod y rali, un o'r siaradwyr a nerchodd yn Gymraeg oedd Mary Silin Roberts. Daeth trychineb i ran y ddau ym 1930. Cafodd Silin wireddu breuddwyd oes, yn cael ymweld â'r undeb Sofietaidd yn y flwyddyn honno. Cafodd amser arbennig, a sgwennau adre yn frwd yn adrodd yr hanes. Nid yw'n syndod deall nad oedd Mary adre ar y pryd, roedd hi yn Denmark. Ond ar y ffordd yn ôl o Rwsia ar y llong, ymosododd haid o fosgitos ar Silin, a dioddefodd yn ddrwg o'r dwymen. Gwyllodd yn ddigon da i fynd i Goleg Harlech ym mis Awst, ond daeth yn wael drachefn. Dychwelodd i Fangor ac ymhen ychydig ddyddiau bu farw yn gwbl annisgwyl. Llwyddodd Mary i ddychwelyd i Fangor y diwrnod cynt. Gallai hyn fod wedi profi'r farwol i'r WEA yng Ngogledd Cymru. Roedd y cwbl yn y fantol pan fu Silin farw. A dyma lle mae Mary yn camu mewn. Cytunodd i gymryd holl gyfrifoldebau Silin a pharhau ar gwaith, a gwnaeth hynny am 15 mlynedd. Mae'n waith aruthrol a lygodd ddal ati drwy flynyddoedd caled y 30au ac yna drwy flynyddoedd y rhyfel. Roedd yr heria yn ddi-ddiwedd. Diffyg cyllid cyson, diffyg tiwtoriad, docni petrol, diffyg papur, pobl yn symud, ansicrwydd. Nid yn anhebyg i'n dyddiau ni heddiw. Wynebodd Mary Silin yr heria hyn i gyd a dal ati. Llwyddodd i'r fath radda nes bod Gogledd Cymru yn cael ei chydnabod fel un o'r rhanbarthau mwyaf gweithgar drwy Brydain gyfan. A hyd yn oed wedi ddi-ymddeol yn swyddogol, parhaodd i weithio yn ddi-baid. Chawn ni byth wybod cost hyn i Mary, ond bu'n eithriadol o hael. gwerthodd ei thŷ am bris isel iawn mwyn i'r WA gael swyddfeydd. Mae'n ffigwr chwedlonol yn hanes WA Gogledd Cymru, ond ni chafodd y gydnabyddiaeth. Flwyddyn yn ôl, cafodd 2 ohonom y cyfle i bori drwy archifa WA Gogledd Cymru, dros 130 o focsys. A dyna'r hyn a fuom yn ei wneud dros y flwyddyn dwytha, mynd drwyddynt. Mae rhain yn ychwanegol at archif helaeth Silin yng Ngholeg Bangor. Ni fyddai rhain gennym oni bai am Mary Silin. Cadwodd bob tamaid o bapur yn ymwneud â Silin a WA. O ganlyniad, mae'r hanes gennym yn llawn. Sylweddolodd Mary beth oedd arwyddocâd y rhain a bu drwyddynt efo crib man ac mae ôl ei llaw ar bopeth. Yn wir, rydyn ni'n teimlo'n agos iawn ati. Pa help gwell sy'n na i astudwyr na chael nodyn gan Mary ar 3/4 y papura yn nodi pwy oedd hwnna hwn neu hon o hon a beth yw arwyddocâd y ddogfen. Mae ein dyled yn anrheithol fawr iddi. Yn anffodus, ni wnaeth neb yr un ffafr â hi, felly mae bylcha amlwg wrth geisio olrhain ei stori. Mi garwn ni yma ddiolch o waelod calon i Tina o swyddfeydd addysg gydol oes yn y Gogledd ac i Def. Nhw, y nyddiau cynnar y clo, gludodd y 100 o focsys a mwy o'r brifysgol i'r swyddfa y WA. A Tina a'i hamynedd di ben draw a phaneidia ddari ein helpu yn ymarferol i symud y focsys hyn yn ôl ac ymlaen fel ein bod yn cael mynd drwyddynt. Diolch yn fawr. Bydd yr archif gyfan yn cael ei throsglwyddo i'r Llyfrgell Genedlaethol mewn ychydig wythnosau. Ond o leia, da ni wedi dechrau ar y gwaith o ddangos i Gymru faint o ddyled sydd gennym i'r peiriant hwn lafuriodd yn ddiflino drwy gydol ei hoes, Mary Silin Roberts. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch o galon i Angharad Thomas yma am recordio hynna o flaen llaw ac am y gwaith caled mae hi a Luned a Iona wedi wneud i baratoi hynna. Iawn te, rwan at yn siaradwr ola ni. Be di'r fersiwn Gymraeg o last but definitely not least, sgwn ni. Felly, hefo ni heddiw, mae Cerys Furlong, prif weithredwr chwarae teg. Croeso cynnes Cerys. Rwan mae Cerys yn brif weithredwr prif elusen cydraddoldeb rhywiol chwarae teg Cymru. Cyn ymuno efo chwarae teg, roedd Cerys yn gyfarwyddwr Cymru ar sefydliad dysgu a gwaith, ac mae ganddi dros 10 mlynedd o brofiad yn gweithio yn y sector addysg a sgiliau. Yn 2018, fe benodwyd Cerys i Fwrdd Datblygu Economaidd Dinas Rhanbarth Caerdydd, sy'n goruchwylio'r cynigion a gyflwynir i'r ddinas, ac mae hi'n cynghori'r cabinet ar y cyd. Yn ogystal efo'i phartneriad busnes, mae Cerys wedi sefydlu nifer fawr o busnesau llwyddiannus ac yn rhedeg grŵp bach o dafarndai a bwytai yng Nghaerdydd, gan gynnwys tafarndai The Lansdowne a The Grange yng Nghaerdydd a bwyty Milkwood ym Mhont Cana. Mae digon yn ei chadw hi'n brysur, dwi'n siŵr. Cafodd Cerys gymrodoriaeth anrhydedd gan Brifysgol Caerdydd yn 2017 am ei gwasanaethau i gydraddoldeb rhywiol. Ym mis Medi 2020, ymunodd Cerys a thîm weithredol y BBC fel cynghorydd allanol. Mae Cerys yn byw yng Nghaerdydd gyda'i gŵr Tom a'i 2 ferch. Diolch i ti, Cerys. Diolch am ymuno heddiw. Draw at y ti.
Diolch, Nia. Thanks very much for having me today. I'm going to try and, I've been on Teams all morning, so it's always a challenge to make sure that I present my slides properly, and I'll rely on one of you to tell me if I'm getting this wrong. Also, as an added challenge, contemporary challenge, I've got a 7-year-old at home with COVID. So interruptions, highly likely impossible. But anyway, it's a real pleasure to be with you all here today. As ever, I'm really delighted to be in the company of Adult Learning Wales. And as Nia said, I've spent a lot of my career in adult education in one form or another. And preparing for today was a real joy and an opportunity to revisit some of the work and thoughts of some of the inspirational women I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. But first I wanted to say a little bit about Chwarae Teg. These are our key objectives. We've been around for 30 years now, celebrating and championing the role of women in all aspects of society. And a key part of what we do is deliver education and training to women, specifically focused on improving confidence and skills to enable women to survive and thrive in workplaces. And when I came to Chwarae Teg, it felt like the perfect home, combining my passion for adult education and second chance learning with my feminist values and desire to see change for women. And as the last speaker today, before the panel discussion, I've taken a bit of liberty with my presentation because the previous speakers have all done a brilliant job of highlighting some of the fantastic women in education. I want to broaden the discussion a little to consider more broadly feminism and education and where we are today. And I wanted to start by painting a bit of a picture of Wales today in terms of gender inequality. Each year, Chwarae Teg publish our report, which brings together data on gender inequality so that we can measure progress or lack of, as we'll see, and hold ourselves and each other and policymakers to account. So this year, in February, was the 4th State of Nations report that we've published, and we include statistics around women's position in the economy, women's representation and women at risk. And I'm going to give a brief overview of this because I think it informs some of our discussion around women in education, which I'll come to in a moment. So we're yet to achieve gender equality in the economy, no surprise there for any working woman. Women still encounter barriers that men do not, and the way in which our economy is structured means that inequality is recreated and reinforced all the time. And that inequality, economic inequality among women and men is linked to the different jobs we do, the sectors and contract types that women are more likely to be employed in, which in turn is shaped by the greater pressure that women often face as a result of caring responsibilities, which I'll touch on in a minute. The gender pay gap is only one measure, but it's often used as a top line indicator of equality in the workplace, as it demonstrates that the impact of inequality in the labour market on average incomes. And it measures specifically the difference in average hourly earnings between women and men. And in 2021, that pay gap in Wales actually increased slightly to 12.3%. That was largely due to men's hourly pay going up by more. So men saw their average hourly pay increase by 49p, whilst women only went up by 34. But also important to note that the gender pay gap really varies across different areas of Wales. In some areas it's as low as 1.9% and in others as high as 25%. And as I mentioned, excuse me, caring responsibilities still, as I've demonstrated today, have a big impact on women's working lives as it more commonly falls to them. I'm not sure whether it's more disruptive for me to have Rem here today or my husband to have it in a cafe, but given it's COVID, that wasn't an option. And so it affects how we work, whether we work, the hours that we work, and the types of jobs that we do. So women are much more likely than men to work part-time. 37% of women in Wales work part-time compared to 11% of men. And obviously that impacts on pay, as part-time work is often paid less per hour than full-time work. And women are also 4 times as more likely than men to say that the reason they're economically inactive, that is not in work or looking for work, is that they're looking after the family or home. And childcare, women have been talking about childcare for hundreds of years. Childcare offer in Wales, whilst reasonably generous, kicks in at age 3, which is just way too late. Most women have made decisions about the type of work that they can do by the time their child is 3. Women's representation, this matters. The reason we talk about it is because having diverse voices in the room means that different issues and perspectives are discussed, as all the women that have been highlighted will know. And that's whether we're talking about politics, senior roles and workplaces, in the classroom, in business. It's really important that women are fairly represented. And I'll talk about representation in education shortly. And in politics, there were decisions that are made that affect every aspect of our life. This diversity of experience is absolutely crucial. Following last Senate elections in May, 43% of our members of the Senate are women, and that's holding broadly steady compared to 2016, but is still obviously below gender balance. We did see the first woman of colour ever elected to the Senate, which is very welcome, but very overdue. And compared to other parts of our political landscape, the Senedd actually performs pretty well. 35% of our Welsh MPs are women, and just 29% of our local councillors. So if you've had your polling card through for 5th of May elections, bear that in mind when you think about who you want to represent you on the council. And in workplaces, women are still much less likely to be in senior roles. 37% of managers, directors and senior officials are women, and that's actually reduced since last year. And in business, similarly as it says here, only 14% of SMEs are led by women. So a long way to go in terms of having our voice heard. And then lastly, around women at risk, women continue to face much greater risk of poverty, social isolation, financial hardship, due to the different positions that men and women occupy in work and society, lots of which is shaped by education. And they also remain at greater risk of abuse, violence, harassment, something which has really brought sharp into focus in 2020 and 2021 with the widely reported murders of Wen Jingling, Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa amongst the hundreds of women killed in those years. Those high profile cases shone a light on the endemic and completely unacceptable misogyny and violence that women continue to face. And this issue just affects every aspect of women's lives, shaping decisions about what to wear, where to go, how to get there. And across the UK, amazingly, 71% of women report having experienced sexual harassment in public places. And nearly half of those don't report it as they don't think it will make any difference. Only 28% of women in Wales feel safe walking home alone at night. And nearly 75% of all domestic abuse victims in England and Wales are women. And we know that specialist services for women saw a 22% increase in the number of survivors who couldn't be supported by refuge due to the lack of capacity or resources. And it's not just on the streets and in homes. Estin published a sobering report around Christmas time called "We Don't Tell Our Teachers," which reported that 61% of female pupils in school report having personal experience of sexual harassment in school, and they don't report it because they don't think the teacher's going to do anything about it and it won't make any difference. And in terms of women's lives, we're unfortunately also at greater risk of poverty, as well as experiencing different risks and impacts of poverty. So poverty rates in Wales have unsurprisingly increased over the past year. 23% households are living in poverty. This is much higher for single parents, of whom most are women. Nearly half of single parent households live in poverty. And the social security system, which is supposed to offer a safety net for those unable to work, or those with long-term health conditions or whose income doesn't provide enough to live on, really isn't there. And you know, we saw during lockdown schemes like furlough and the self-employment scheme offer financial support to many, but our day-to-day social security system doesn't benefit from that kind of investment, and we know that remains an issue. Majority of universal credit claimants are women. So the overall picture in summary from 2022 is that we're not making enough progress and we're not making it fast enough. And against too many of the key indicators, we're seeing little or no movement, which is why we call for a renewed focus and energy on tackling inequality. So what has all this got to do with education and women? Well, adult education has, as we've heard, always been an area of education that has attracted women. Many of the consciousness raising groups of feminist movement of the 1970s and 80s grew from adult education classes, and those classes have often challenged traditional teaching and learning methods and classroom hierarchies. And we know that the majority of students in adult learning are women, as are the tutors, volunteers and middle managers. However, it does seem to me, and I might be wrong here, that there's little analysis of who provides education in the post-16 sector in terms of gender and other demographics. So in 2015, nearly 60% of registered teachers in FE were female, which is lower than school. 75% of teachers in schools are female. But I couldn't find any more recent data on the Education Workforce Council website that provided a gender breakdown. And in terms of learners, of the 70,000 plus learners in Wales aged 25 and above, excluding higher education, 65% are women, and that gender profile is largely driven through part-time programmes, including adult community learning and work-based learning, whereas in the under 25 learners, the majority are male. Learner numbers, I was depressed to see, having used to monitor these regularly, have continued to fall drastically and consistently since at least 2013. And in 2020, 2021, they fell by 32% to only just over 5,500 learners. And it won't surprise perhaps many of you, because who've heard me speak before in previous lives, the leaders of most of our institutions delivering adult learning are predominantly male, despite all of those other statistics. So as I was thinking about today, some of these facts that I've shared, and just reflecting on the role of women in education and feminism in education, I was taken back in time to my mid-20s when I first started working at NIACE, the National Institute of Adult Continuing Education as it was then, Learning and Work Institute. I worked with some phenomenal women, the impact of whom perhaps I didn't fully appreciate at the time, but it's been amazing to revisit the work of some of those women like Veronica McGivney, Jane Thompson, Jean Barr, and many others. So I'm going to draw heavily on the thoughts of Jane Thompson for a moment, in particular as we reflect on, that's my cat falling off a shelf, as we reflect on women in education and how there's that intersect between feminism and adult education. And Jane wrote 15 years ago at least that feminist analysis is usually missing from the debate. And she goes on to argue that the lack of concern and the feminist silence should be regarded as surprising, because for at least 20 years between the mid-70s and mid-90s, in spite of Thatcherism, feminism played a really energetic role in reinvigorating liberal adult education and reinventing radical adult education. It influenced both the curriculum, practice in ways that articulated and informed many of the really important social and political changes taking place in women's lives. Those were the days, my friend, she wrote, we thought they'd never end, but it seems to me that they sadly have ended, and that should be a wake-up call for us all, me included in my organisation. There is generally a lack of interest and concern about women in education, which is why this event is so important. You know, who is learning, who is teaching, who makes the decisions, and what the learners are learning. And for the most part, I fear, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, I fear that feminism in education is often regarded with derision. And we can see from the oppression and discrimination that women continue to face, as I outlined just in our State of the Nations report, and there's many others. And the question, I guess, is what are we doing about it? How can we learn from our past when we look back into our history? 30 years ago, the experiences of women were the reason why adult education, informed by feminism, developed a new kind of women's education, not to cure or reform so-called victims, but to create new knowledge about inequalities of power and resources in society, and to encourage critical understanding of the causes and consequences of inequalities like gender inequality, but also to inform individual and collective action so that we can challenge and remove those inequalities. And outside of higher education, women's studies, feminism, gender critical theory are unfortunately all too often absent from education. Why? So this picture is from UNICEF, and I think it just captures for me the moment that we're at. I thought I was generation equality. I was born in 1981, going to school in the 1980s and 90s. I thought I could do anything. I was really confident and assertive. I genuinely believed I could do or be anything. It didn't occur to me really that anything would hold me back, and that was the privileged upbringing I had. But now I can see in my personal and professional journey has been shaped in many ways by the societal forces around us, by those unconscious and conscious biases and decisions that I have had to make or that have been made for me. And that's true across the world. Girls and boys see gender inequality in their homes and communities every day, in textbooks, in the media, among the adults who care for them and teach them, and in the role models that they aspire to be. And we know it's not true really that every child is born equal, but certainly inequalities start smaller and then they grow, and we all have a duty and responsibility to play our part in doing something about it. So thinking about women in education and reflecting on the role of adult education, we need to consider how and why we've moved away from a place where feminism and education intersect, where our once brilliantly curious, rebellious, diverse and interesting education and voluntary sector, because as I said, we have responsibility to, now scarcely exists, to be sadly replaced by a relentless obsession with educational reorganisation, training, employability, and what governments define as worthy skills, which may not be the ones that we define. So finally, this is Sonia Sotomayor. She's an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the USA. She's the third woman to hold the position, the first woman of colour, the first Hispanic, first Latina member of the court. And I think she's right in what she says. Gender equality is one of the 17 global sustainable development goals that form part of what's supposed to be a blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and the future. Gosh, how far away that feels right now. And it's also at the heart of the wellbeing goal for a more equal Wales in the Future Generations Act. So it's all about business, but we're a really long way from equality in education. And I could pick on any range of measures, the gendered nature of subjects, the resulting gendered nature of sectors and industries, and the impact that that has on the gender pay gap that I talked about, and women's earnings over their lifetime, the culture of some educational institutions, as well as the gendered nature of leadership in education that I sort of hinted at earlier. So I wanted to kind of finish with, not to be too downbeat, but what can we do when it comes to our own leadership? How do we shift from blaming something or each other to taking responsibility? And it strikes me that blame is a remarkably popular but ineffective strategy for change. Having worked in post-16 education for many years, I've seen sometimes how this happens. And I know it's not always like this, but often when it comes to the really hard stuff, addressing poverty, inequality, achievement, so on, too often we blame each other. So at its worst, schools blame colleges for things, colleges blame schools, administrators blame teachers, who blame the LEA or Welsh Government for impossible workloads and working conditions, and high schools blame primary schools, who blame early childhood, who blame the parents. Where does it stop is what I come to wonder. And I think, to deal with the challenges of the 21st century, we've got to shift from blame to responsibility, to be the outstanding leaders we want to be, to have the education system that we want for adults to exist. We need to take responsibility for this and to listen to the feedback that we hear and that we give to children, students, colleagues, and listen, learn, reflect, and make changes rather than wait for somebody else to do it. We have to take personal and collective responsibility for that and model the changes we want in education and in feminism. And that's it from me.
Diolch o galon I ti, Cerys. Thank you ever so much. Ac yn anhygoel, cath yn syrthio oddi ar y shelf, a cat falling off a shelf, and a 7-year-old home with COVID. So well done you from getting from the start to the finish. Ond ie, diolch yn fawr iawn I ti am y darlun yna. Ydy, mae o'n tristau rhywun bod gennym ni mor bell I fynd yn y byd addysg fel yna. Ond mae mor bwysig cael darlun gonest a real, fel bod ni'n gwybod I ba gyfeiriad dyn ni yn symud ac yn mynd I symud, a bod ni yn stopio rhoi'r bai yna fel y dysgu a dechrau cymryd cyfrifoldeb. Diolch o galon I ti, Cerys. Felly, da ni rwan yn mynd I symud at yn panel trafod ni, a dwi'n falch iawn o ddeud bod yr athro Diana Lorelad a hefyd Cerys Furlong o Chwarae Teg yn mynd I aros hefo ni. Mae Catherine yn mynd I arwain rhan yma'r digwyddiad, y rhan ola'r digwyddiad. Ond yn gyntaf, dwi jyst eisiau tynnu sylw at un cwestiwn sydd wedi yn cyrraedd ni gan Alison Elliott. Diolch iddi hi am ei sylwada. Cwestiwn yn uniongyrchol I Rachel oedd o, dwi'n credu, ac I Nilw, ond mi fyddwn ni'n pasio y cwestiwn yn amlaen iddyn nhw I gael I ymateb nhw. Ond yn garedig iawn, mae Diana wedi cytuno I ychwanegu at hynna. Felly y cwestiwn ydy, mae Alison yn dweud, my question, bearing in mind that Betty Campbell responded to her local circumstances, how do members of the panel respond to the concern that the notion of global education imposes a consumerist Western ideology, often obliterating cultural nuance. Cwestiwn pwysig iawn, a very important question. So if I can ask you to come in on that, Diana, but then I'm great. Diolch.
Yes, thank you. Well, I did think it was a very interesting question, Alison. And although I noted that you felt I was a political figure, I must say I don't think of myself as a political figure. I mean, even when I was in the ministry, I was a civil servant, so not allowed to be a political figure under those circumstances. I think I'm more political outside it than in. But the issue is important because we do have a global world now, and especially in the context of education, we have increasing impact from digital technologies and the way in which people are using them. And so how do we respond to that? I think it is a danger that things become sort of move in a direction that suits the big corporate technologies, for example. And the danger I see most of all is the way in which they seek to transform education through artificial intelligence. And they really do think they can do that. They think they've got something to offer, but they don't engage with us in thinking through how that might work. So that is something we have to be very aware of. And I think from the feminist point of view that Keris was talking about just a minute ago, I think it's our responsibility to fight against those inevitable pressures. And one of the things that we can do, I was trying to explain through the kinds of digital tools we're using, like the Learning Designer, is to give a voice to all of those, majority of them are women teachers, who are working across the world to find out ways in which they can change things in their own locality, and listen to those. That was the point of saying we've got to listen to teachers, we've got to give agency to teachers and trust the teachers. But give them the opportunity to do this. And unless we find our own ways of manipulating and exploiting and using what digital technologies offer, we will be swamped by the way in which the easy approaches will take over. So trying to demonstrate how we do that with the way that we have people sharing things on Padlet, for example, is a small example of that. Those individual local nuances change what other people have done to suit the local circumstances. And that's precisely what we need to make possible for people. So I thought it was a great question. And I think we do have an answer to it, but the beginnings of an answer to it, these are powerful forces.
Diolch yn fawr yr ateb Diana. Felly, Catrin, na I basio ymlaen I ti. Dwi'n gwybod bod gen ti gwestiynau i'w taflu draw at yn panel ni. Draw at ti.
Diolch, Nia. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and it's been such a powerful and emotive and fascinating discussion this morning to hear all our speakers. Thank you all very much. But very quickly, Diana, you talked about trust the teachers. We do entrust our teachers, our professional team of teaching staff, enormously within our organisation. And Keris, you talked about taking responsibility. We do want to take responsibility as an organisation. We do want to trust our teachers and our tutors. So any last sort of any sort of top tip for us as an organisation? We can't change everything, clearly, but as a national provider of adult education across Wales, we would really much welcome any final comments that you want to make that we can take forward to help promote opportunities for women in education. Perhaps if I could go to you first, Keris.
Thanks, Catherine. Nice to see you.
Hiya.
Long time. I think I agree it's about trusting the teachers, but it's also, with trust comes the need to empower teachers, and as women working in education, we don't kind of all pop up as critical feminists. We're not immune to the societal pressures around us. As I said, I never thought I would end up doing something like this because I frankly didn't think it was necessary. That was the position of children of second wave feminists, I guess, who were born in the 80s and 90s. So I think it's about giving those practical tools, breaking down the curriculum. Why is it that my 13-year-old daughter still has textbooks that are full of white men in coats when she's doing science, and the examples that are used are not ones that she identifies with, or not women that could be role models for her. You know, what are we teaching our young kids when we've got a kitchen at one end of the classroom and a workstation at the other, and we think it's okay for all the girls to go to the kitchen and the boys to go to the workstation? You know, we have to empower our teachers, whether it's of adults or children, to recognise those things and have strategies in place that give them the confidence to be able to do them. Because, you know, certainly my approach as a feminist and as an organisation particularly is not to go around kind of telling off teachers, educators, institutions, businesses and sort of being the gender police, but it's about educating and informing and giving those tools to be confident to say, actually, we can get different outcomes, but to get different outcomes, we have to change the way that we deliver things.
Thanks, Cerys. And Diana?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about the pandemic, just picking up on what Cerys was saying there about textbooks and science textbooks, was the way in which women scientists were so often on our TV screens. I thought it was fantastic. You know, quite different from what we've seen in the past. So I do hope 13-year-old girls are getting the message. It's a career for them too. As to the issue of what we do for women, I mean, my mantra of trust the teachers is certainly not addressed to organizations like yours, Catherine, I promise you. It's to what I see happening now, which is that in universities and schools alike, you see the leaders and managers who are unfortunately still, a great many of them predominantly male, especially in the university sector. And we see them now organizing to tell us all what to do about taking digital education forward. They don't know. They were not the ones living that life over the past 2 years of experimenting with how on earth we do all this. Teachers didn't get very much help at all, but they figured it out. Didn't always work, but they learned a lot, and now they want to continue with it and make it better. So listen to what they're saying. Give teachers that voice. Trust them. They know what they're doing. You don't need to tell them. So that's where I'm addressing my message. And I think you're doing all exactly the right things. And I would just say, give them the tools, you know, things like these kinds of courses, which bring them in, tools like the learning designer, which enable them to express what they do to others, borrow what others are doing and adapt it and so on, so that teachers can act like design scientists. They are discovering. It's like engineering. You know, it's not a science teaching. It is much more like trying things out, figuring out what's going wrong, figuring out what you can make better, and doing it again and again and again. So I think you're doing a fantastic job there, and I just hope you will join me in that mantra of persuading other people to listen to what the teachers have learned.
Thank you, Diana. And I think it's important to say that we are action orientated as an organisation, and we do not want to waste people's time by bringing people like yourselves, experts in the field, fantastic speakers. We want to galvanise now the messages that we've heard today and actually incorporate them within our strategic planning and make sure that we have space to promote opportunities for women and really take on board everything that's been said today. So it's really important that people understand this is not just a talking shop. It is about doing something about it. And I am very privileged to be in a position to help with that agenda. Before we close today, and I hand back to Nia, we've heard a lot about the gender inequalities and gender discrimination, not only in Wales and across the UK, but broader as well. And part of our message today is to launch an appeal. This is connected to one of our council members, part of our governing body. Her name is Salamatu Fada, who is very heavily involved in the network of Women for Sustainable Development. This is to support young girls in northern Nigeria as part of a period poverty elimination chain. These girls are unable to access appropriate sanitary products, and as such, they're unable to go to school and actually access education. This is a basic entitlement that is not able to be supported to the extent. So we are sharing with you today a link which has gone into the chat facility there around the details around the project, and further details of how you can support the appeal will be sent to you following this conference. So it's very timely and it's very appropriate to mention this particular cause that the organisation is supporting at this time. So draw I ti Nia, diolch yn fawr iawn. Over to you Nia now, and thank you again for everybody for your contributions today. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Catherine. A dwi'n credu, mae 2 funud gyda ni jyst i fi ddiolch a ffarwelio chi, ond yn gyflym iawn, so ni jyst yn licio diolch. Dwi'n meddwl bod o werth crybwyll. Mae Anthony Cope wedi anfon neges at ni. And Anthony says that I've been very inspired by the speakers today, but as a man, it can feel that men are slightly excluded from the debate or even as hostile to the cause. And he asks, how can male allies be included in this debate? In other equality struggles, and he notes that I'm gay, gender is not such a barrier to working for the ultimate goal. I know Cerys has responded to his message saying, please don't feel excluded. And I think it's just something we all want to echo. Am I right? I don't know, Cerys, whether you want to respond briefly to that before we finish off, because I think it's a really, really important point. We're all in this together. Diolch, Cerys.
I'm constantly trying to encourage men to come and work for us and work with us, and because we can't make those changes alone. And as I said in my answer, it worries me that we try and kind of divide up the equality space when actually we should be mainstreaming equalities and understanding how they intersect. Because too often we find ourselves as as minority groups, whether that's gay people, people of colour, disabled people, pitted against each other and competing for space and airtime, and that is not where we need to be. It's about supporting each other, amplifying each other's voice. So I think it's, there are some incredible male allies working on gender equality that I could certainly direct you to, so feel free to get in touch with me.
A dyna ni wedi cyrraedd diwedd yn digwyddiad ni heddiw yma. 2 flynedd ar ôl y cyfnod clo cenedlaethol cyntaf, da ni fel sefydliad ac fel unigolion wrth gwrs wedi bod ar daith yn dydan. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd am ymuno â ni. Diolch arbennig i'n siaradwyr gwadd ni heddiw, i Rachel Clark, Milw Ahmed, Angharad Thomas, yr athro Diana Lorelad a Cerys Furlong. Diolch i Catherine Robson, John Greystone ac y holl staff am eu hymroddiad nhw trwy'r flwyddyn. Felly diolch o galon i chi gyd am mynd yr ail filltir i hwyluso hyn. Mae'r gwyliau pasg ond blaen ni, mae'r haul yn tywynnu, felly pasg hapus iawn i chi gyd, a very happy Easter to you all and enjoy the break. Diolch yn fawr i chi.